Mike Enslin, a cult writer, is known for a series of ghost survival guides, including such titles as 10 Haunted Hotels, 10 Haunted Graveyards, and 10 Haunted Lighthouses. You can walk up to him and ask for an autograph during his tour, but hurry, space is limited. Mike is working on a new book his publisher is dying to get his teeth into and has a deadline to meet, but he's running out of time, literally. This is Mr. G of Synergy, and we're digging into the lore of a new film, 1408, released in 2007, directed by Mikael Håfström, based on the short story by Stephen King. The use of time loops, warps, and jumps is a common theme of 1408. Many examples are obvious and in your face, while others are subtle, and a few are extremely theoretical. With those is where we'll spend our time on. So turn off your internet gas and find your safe space. Let's go over how 1408 manipulates time to tell its story. But before we do, like, share, or subscribe if you enjoy this content and like to see more like this one. When you first watch 1408, you likely won't notice how time is a recurring theme until Mike Enslin picks up the clock in his room. However, the more you digest how time is interwoven into the plot, the sooner you pick up the clues with subsequent viewings. Whether it's out of atmosphere or a hint into Enslin's disorientation, time is cleverly hinted when he struggled to find the bed and breakfast in the rain, and the owner wondered if he was going to make it. At first viewing, it's a throwaway line, but good stories don't have throwaway lines. The opening scenes can set the tone or theme of the film. A writer struggling with time in a hotel, of all places. The owners spin tall tales, ghost stories lurking in the Weeping Beach Inn, while telling stories that happened in the past is not an example of a time loop. Expecting or pretending to relive them is. This is what Mike Enslin does for a living. After we see the tools of his trade, the little trinkets and ornaments that define his character, we get an extended wide shot of the room he is in. The camera is fixed. Cinematography enthusiasts have attributed this technique as an example of stability and predictability, in contrast to later in the film, where room 1408 becomes chaotic and absurdly illogical. But there is something else at play. Enslin's fight with boredom is seen through the use of jump cuts, an editing technique removing segments of time within a single continuous shot. Time is manipulated. The rules of linear time tracking have been broken. Arriving at the Dolphin and stepping into the lobby, there are hints of anachronisms. Certain things, people, props out of place, a little out of time. A bellman appears out of nowhere, unexpected timing and unwanted. A woman with her baby carriage that is too far removed from modern. After a history lesson from Olin, Enslin is shown the 14th floor, because there is no 13th. He wanders the halls, distracted by the journal loaned to him. 4 doors away, he sees evidence of life, a busy housekeeper. Mumblings behind one door, a conversation behind another. Or were these imaginary conversations, playing in Enslin's head, replaying moments right before the murders? He makes a full circle around the corridors without finding his room, or so we think. This may be the first example of a loop. Are we later fooled of occupancy on the 14th floor, with discarded room service left to the flies, and another appearance of the mother and her vintage carriage? The time it took to reach his room is much more short, only a few steps away it seemed. After a full circle, where did the housekeeper go? Unsynchronized logic between time and space traveled has begun. Entering the room, Mike tours the individual chambers and helps himself to $8 beer nuts. Take notice his narration and his actions are out of sync. This is a deliberate editing technique, common with exposition using lone characters, and it quickly realigns, resyncs by the time he's on the bed reviewing paintings. A deliberate manipulation of linear time. When Enslin sticks his head out the open window, he is taunted by the radio, playing a Carpenter song released in 1970. Many will note the lyrics as a warning, a threat of terrible experiences to come, but I also posit that this is a clue when Enslin is currently in. He has just experienced a time shift. Mints are on the pillow, where there were none before, and they were not there when he first entered the room. Olin wouldn't bother leaving mints to melt on pillows if he had no intention of occupying the room. Did the room manifest foiled candies, or did it send Ensland back during a time where guests were commonly expected and the Carpenters were popular on the radio? The refolded toilet paper in Ensland's search for someone in the room reinforces the idea that objects were reset. But could it be what was changed was time? The roll of paper he looks at a second time is another roll from another decade. His search for an intruder that doesn't exist is posed like making loops in the room, and he begins seeing things. Even we, the audience, don't know if they have material substance, like the mints and the beer nuts, from hallucinations crawling with the air ducts. The camera starts tilting, and the subtle disorientations from time evolves visibly and audibly. Ensland's experience jumps to him holding a UV light. In many ways, the story jumps ahead in time to see clues of the past. It's not enough the camera tilts, but the paintings as well. One question I'm not going to address in this video is who did Mike talk to the first time at the front desk to fix his thermostat? But one I will address is what did the engineer see when Ensland opened the door? By the engineer's question, he wasn't told that the room was too hot. You would think by the moment the door opened, he would have easily guessed. Or perhaps he didn't feel extreme heat or cold by keeping outside the door. The engineer was looking into the room like looking through a portal into a different place and time. Even the engineer's exit is playing on our awareness of time, seeming to move faster than his feet was shown moving. Ensland celebrates air conditioning with a drink, and the radio blasts the Carpenter again. We're seeing events repeated, recreated, another sort of loop, but more literal, before the clock displays a 60-minute countdown. Ensland loses his hearing for a moment, perhaps an analogy of equilibrium and how we keep our balance, our orientation. The room physically attacks him, smashing his hand before scalding it with steam. It's just a tease the room is playing, because the radio blasts again. We've only just begun. The irony by now is as subtle as a 2x4, as some say, before the phone rings, and Mike has to pick up the phone, and pick up the phone again. Repetition, but getting nowhere with it, sort of like his Kafka-like discussion with the front desk, and he panics and cannot escape. Ensland's pleas through the window has him seeing his doppelganger. It's not quite his reflection, but a similar reality set in a different space or different time. They're slightly out of sync, as Mike's doppelganger is mortally wounded, while his experience was more of a nightmare. The following sequence, Mike throwing a lamp out of the window, was a very clever and novel clue. Playing the voice of the audience, he sought to get the attention of pedestrians below by throwing things out from 13 stories high. Sounds something a desperate person would do, would you? But the objects vanish. They blink out. Is this a deus ex machina, sort of like losing your cell phone signal when you needed it most? Or does this give credence to the theory that his room is in another time? His lamp, for example, crashed into the boulevard below sometime in the 1970s. Could we find an old newspaper article about it if we looked hard enough? From here, Ensland begins hearing voices from his past. He's not sure himself if the experiences are delusions or psychokinetic fibrillations. Audio cues from his past come to life in the television, and it broadcasts what we are made to believe home video recorded by Mike. The room also broadcasts 3D holograms as it replays the factory owner and the 1950s woman leaping out the window. Ensland tries to get the attention of the mother in the next room. At this point, we're still thinking she's a genuine paying guest. But he's getting frustrated and angry. Audio cues are disorienting him. His words are echoing like a microphone feedback that is a pain to his ears. Then comes Mike's journey from watching events from his past on television to living them. But the film makes clear it's only an illusion he can only see. Once again, we hear Mike narrate, but his words and his lips are not synchronized until later. Paying tribute to earlier works by King, Enslin tries to walk the ledge to the window of the room next door, but room 1408 plays with him. We realize its power is beyond illusion or telekinesis. Its command of reality is illogical, better defined as hellish. The holograms of leapers reappear, the same actors. I describe them as broadcasts rather than spectral beams, simply because as they leap, they vanish much like the lamp did. Does this mean the lamp was an illusion, a ghostly appliance, or were we seeing this in real time? If it was circa 1950, and she disappears into her own time. Mike has completely immersed into the room's laws of the supernatural. It has rewritten his past by changing his voice recording, describing his room as one without a window. It never had a window. Mike seems to regain his composure only after dropping his voice recorder, a piece of his identity. But his focus betrays him as he sees a staged play of history of him and his wife grieving over their sick daughter. The loops are not subtle, but nightmarish. Mike is reminded by another flash of the madman. After making a video call, when video calls were considered weird and often overlooked for phone calls over wire, Enslin tries to escape through the air ducts. We are still made to believe the guest next door, the mother with a vintage baby carriage, can save him. However, once again, he's pounding with his fists over the cries of a baby. He's flustered and impatient, but it's the voice of the past he hears. The mother is his wife, Lily. The baby is his daughter, Katie. Mike discovers he's in a fantastical time-traveling tube, seeing his life flash before his eyes, escaping the ghost of 1408 and an imaginary argument with the likeness of Olin. Mike relives the final moments of Katie's life. The fax machine sends Katie's dress and begins a short montage. A montage is another editing technique of piecing together different cuts or scenes as a continuous whole that also may show that time has passed. In this case, the dangerous drop of freezing temperatures that forces Mike to burn the past and symbols of luck and fortune. He makes a narration into his recorder while his voice is in sync with his lips. The visuals are not, and shows quick jump cuts. The story finds new and interesting ways depicting the corruption of time. Can room 1408 exist in other times? Or transport its occupants into another year, decade, or dimension? Can the room welcome its guests in the year 2007 before a quiet trip into 1970 or 1950? Lily reconnects with Mike and tells him the police are in his room, but he is not. The police are still in 2007, so where or when is Mike? He believes he's back in California, having woken up from a very bad dream, trying to make sense of his experience. Pieces of vision begin to seep into his reality. When he tries to resume his daily routine, he strangely finds himself reliving them. The same lines, the same actors. Mike is unable to distinguish the lines between his life and his manufactured memories. The Dolphin Hotel, its victims, are not to be found in the written record. But Mike closes the chapters of his life, visits his father, and finally finishes his book about the imaginary room 1408 in the imaginary hotel. What is left is a trip to the post office. Once again, history is replayed. The ghostly bellman returns as the postal clerk, who tells Mike his book isn't going anywhere today. Construction workers tear up the place, and one literally tosses time at his feet. The room crumbles, and we are given a combination of chaotic camera shots, including montages and jump cuts, before revealing Mike never escaped, and cannot escape, the emotional devastation of losing his daughter. When the room is restored, so is the clock, and it resets the counter back to another 60 minutes of hell. It is unclear what the time is outside the door. What is clear? Mike begins to see the future of visions that has not yet occurred. Not only the graves and headstones, but the phone melting due to very high heat. In his final requiem, his voice and his actions are in perfect sync. Mike's not playing with time in 1408. He's ending it. Let me know in the comments below, what were your favorite moments in the film? This is Mr. G of Synergy saying, when it comes to making videos about 1408, we've only just begun. Check out other videos on the channel. Thanks for watching.